Hi everyone. Today on the YouTube channel we are looking at a German camera which seems to have flown under the radar a little, but turns out to be an absolutely fantastic little camera. It's the Voigtlander Vito C. So this is a very small, very light little zone focus camera made not by Voigtlander, but by a company called Balder. In the early 1980s in West Germany. And it was designed by a designer called Karl-Heinz Lange, who had built all sorts of cameras throughout the post-war years in Germany. And he'd worked at Rollei and had helped design various small cameras under the Minox brand. And when he came to Balder, or back to Balder I think, he had an idea for a small viewfinder camera that would hark back to the folding cameras that used to be popular in between World War I and World War II. So he came up with this, and it is very much like an old medium format folding camera. The camera is sort of ready for action by pulling out the door at the front like that. It's an incredibly light camera. It only weighs a few hundred grams, but it doesn't feel like it's going to fall apart in your hands. It's, for a plastic camera, reasonably robust, and it just has this, wonderful tactile quality to it. It has a little wind-on lever which sits flush with the camera when it's not in use, and it has one of the best shutter noises on a compact camera I've ever come across, which we'll test right now. Beautiful little clack. Just a wonderful, wonderful little design. Apart from the wonderful body styling and the nifty little folding design here, the camera has a really, really good lens. It's a color Scopar 38mm lens, which opens up as wide as f2.8. It's incredibly sharp, incredibly good at getting rid of flare and other aberrations, wonderful color rendition, just a beautiful little lens that really suits how this camera is shot. With zone focus, basically you are setting the lens's focus in a series of zones, and if your subject is in the zone you've chosen, then chances are it's going to be perfectly sharp. Interestingly, for most other cameras, you have these settings either on the lens or near to the lens. You don't actually see them anywhere on the lens. What you've actually got is a traditional distance indicator on the Voigtlander's lens. But when you actually look through the camera, and I'm looking now, you have a sort of bright line finder, and for cheeky little cartoons that sort of correspond with the distance you're focusing. And if you're focusing at the nearest point, it's got a little cartoon gentleman posing. Get a bit further out, there's two of them. Get a bit further out from that, there's three. And then finally there's a mountain in the distance, and that's at infinity. That's pretty standard to have those zones at those distances. But it's just quite interesting that Balder, who made the camera, chose not to signify it in the normal way. So this camera, this is the Voigtlander Vito C version. Interesting that it was branded with this name because Voigtlander, who were a very famous West German camera maker after World War II, though the history goes back to the late 18th century. They had a viewfinder camera called the Vito C. It was one of a long range of simpler sort of zone focus viewfinder, rangefinder cameras that were made in the 50s and 60s. So perhaps they were harking back to their previous days. I think by this stage Voigtlander had actually stopped making cameras, and it was a brand owned by another German camera maker. I've actually got the Balder Mini 35 version of this camera as well. They are absolutely identical. exactly the same features, exactly the same lens. It's just, you know, the branding that's different. What's great about this camera is not only is the lens really nice, but the camera's metering system allows you to shoot films up to 800 ASA. And the film settings are all manual, it's not DX coded. So if you wanted to take a roll of 400 speed film and push it up to 800, then you can do that with this camera. It's incredibly light, it's incredibly compact, and that little click of the shutter is, you know, fairly unobtrusive if you're out on the street. I'd heard about these cameras but never seen one, and I was told about them by a friend of mine in the US, Anthony Rue, who's a real film camera devotee and runs Volta, which is a cafe in Gainesville in Florida. And he told me that he'd used one of these cameras when he was visiting coffee plantations in Colombia. And he'd taken a number of films on one visit, and his camera was sitting in his camera bag, and it got pinched. So he lost not only the films, but this wonderful little camera that he loved. And I heard the story and, you know, felt bad for Anthony. So I was passing a camera store on a weekend visit to Brighton in the UK. And I found one of these just sitting in the window. And I thought, why don't I get this for Anthony? And I bought it. It cost me £75. And lo and behold, I got home and there was an email from Anthony saying that he'd just found one himself. So suddenly I had this camera that I was going to send to him as a gift, and it was no longer needed as a gift, so I ended up keeping it myself. It turned out I already had the Balder version of the camera sitting in my pile of cameras I'd bought some years ago. So I suppose inspired by what Anthony had said about this camera, I loaded it with film. And I was absolutely blown away by the quality of the camera. Just a incredibly beautiful lens, and just one of those cameras that you just want to shoot with. Like, it's so easy to shoot with. I think maybe because I'm used to shooting zone focus from using cameras like the Casina CX2, the Lomo LCA and the Olympus XA2, I didn't have too many problems sort of getting used to the style of shooting. It is a bit like shooting a rangefinder. All you're having to do with this camera is choose the distance. The camera has a fully automatic exposure system. What that means is it will choose both the aperture and the shutter speed that it needs to take a properly exposed photo. This has become a real staple when I go traveling. It's such a simple camera to just put in a pocket or, you know, pop in a bag. Great for shooting in very bright lights, summer destinations, putting in slide film. Really good exposure system on this, so I've been really pleased with how well exposed slide film has been on this. I've even shot, you know, some concerts, some, you know, documentary style shots at rock concerts. Because this camera is so easy to take in with you to a show. People aren't going to notice it sitting in your pocket, whereas they might take issue with you having an SLR. And also just, you know, that 800 ASA setting allows you to shoot in less than ideal lighting conditions. These were never particularly cheap cameras, so you can expect to see these, you know, 75 to 125 pounds, which I consider to be a very fair price for what is a really nice little camera. It has everything you need in a no-fuss travel camera that just allows you to concentrate on taking great pictures.